So you've just started playing Windward Horizon, a naval RPG with deep and often complicated ship customization, and maybe you're a little overwhelmed by the sheer amount of choice the game gives you. Well, today, we're going to demystify what I would say is the most important part of your ship's build, your captain skills. Each captain can have up to 3 skills that unlock progressively as they rank up. The second skill unlocking at green artisan quality or level 2, and the third skill at gold artifact quality or level 7. These skills can be swapped from captain to captain as long as you are willing to sacrifice one of them to make the other stronger. And that gets to the point of this video. How in the 7 Seas do you know if a captain skill is worth using? There are a ton of different viable build varieties in Windward Horizon, but they can generally be broken down into the 3 RPG archetypes of defense, offense, and support. So we are going to go through all 17 captain skills and rank them by their general usefulness in combat across all build types. The rating system we will be using is S tier for skills that work perfectly on any build, A tier for skills that work effectively on 2 out of the 3 defense, offense, or support archetypes, B tier for a skill that works on a single archetype only, while C are only suitable for a very specific sub-archetype build. And of course, F tier. You basically should never use these for combat. They aren't necessarily bad skills in isolation, just that there will always be a better option for you to use. Let's start with one of my favorite skills, Shrapnel. Temporarily sacrifice a bunch of your ship's armor for a temporary boost to your mortar damage. This is an A tier skill. Despite making you vulnerable while active, this skill can easily double the damage of your mortar attacks, even with only a moderate investment into the armor stat. Additionally, every single ship has a mortar, regardless of archetype or sub-archetype. Not all ships will necessarily be built for high mortar damage or have high armor to trade for mortar damage, but its effectiveness and general versatility puts Shrapnel solidly in the A tier. Hide is an interesting skill. Activate to fart out a fog cloud that immediately takes you out of combat and removes you from pirates' line of sight, while also reducing your own visibility to 0. This can be used to effectively de-aggro pirates when you find yourself on the verge of sinking, sneakily capture towns without pirates knowing, or even allow you to use your out-of-combat repair skill while hiding inside the cloud. Whilst these mechanics are useful, by themselves they don't justify taking up a skill slot from your captain, and that would put Hide at a C or even F tier. However, and this is a big however, when synergized with on-entering combat skills from your first mate, Hide allows you to on-demand re-trigger some very powerful buffs that would otherwise require you to spend time retreating and then return into combat. This isn't a deep dive into the first mate skills, though do click subscribe so you can be notified when I do eventually release that video, but for example, you can combine Hide with first mate skills like Element of Surprise, which will almost double your damage for a few seconds upon exiting the fog cloud. Bloodthirst, which is Windward's version of Life Leech, allowing you to heal proportionally to the damage you deal. Top Shelf Powder, a moderate and long-lasting damage boost for your cannons and mortar abilities. Here we go again, a moderate and long-lasting defensive boost. So with all that in mind, by itself Hide has some utility, but ultimately it only shines when combined with specific first mate skills. So we'll slot this one in at B tier. Good for some builds that have the appropriate first mate synergies. Death Ward, straight up S tier skill. Once every 80 seconds or so, cheat death, allowing you to stay in the fight, keep pumping out damage or heals. That cooldown might seem a little long, but with the pace of Windward's combat, I think that's the ideal duration to be an S tier skill without being completely overpowered. I will put one small asterisk next to this skill, and that's as you become better at the game and min-max your build and playstyle, Death Ward will become less and less useful. It's a skill with diminishing returns. When you start out and are dying to a lot of pirates, Death Ward is absolutely the correct choice of skill for your captain, but as you start getting tens or hundreds of hours into the game, you'll find yourself proccing the skill much less, thus reducing its effectiveness. 100% an S tier skill, just something to keep in mind. Bend the Wind. This is our first F tier skill. While I tested it out extensively for my no cannons rammer build, the speed at which this skill will change the wind direction is far too slow to be reliably effective in the fast-paced, high-mobility combat that a rammer ship operates in. You'll often need to perform fast 180s to re-engage the pirate armada, only for the wind to now be directly in your face as it laboriously changes direction to maybe give you a slight crosswind by the time you re-engage. Now keep in mind, this tier list is specifically about effectiveness in combat, so I will throw Bend the Wind a bone. If you play Windward solely to be a merchant, then this is the skill for you, allowing you to significantly boost your straight line speed around the map and beat those pesky NPC traders to the profitable trade routes. For the purpose of this tier list though, big F. Reset cooldowns. We're giving ourselves whiplash here because we're going right back to S tier. Every 40 seconds or so, reset all of your on cooldown skills so you can immediately re-trigger and unload your firepower onto the enemies. Essentially, every 40 seconds, you get to double your damage with a fully buffed double broadside and double mortar attack. Deploy Giant Net. Grant 15% physical resistance and reflect any direct hit mortars back at the pirate that shot it at you. I do love this skill, it's very goofy and fun to throw pirate mortars back at them, but it's not very effective. Even the highest damage pirate mortars that can one-shot you, when you reflect them back, will barely tickle the pirate. Just a byproduct of the way the damage and defense scaling works for players versus NPCs. The defense bonuses of this skill will save you from sinking sometimes, and on defensive builds it can be used alternatively with other damage resist skills to make you tankier for longer. And in a super niche use of this skill, you can reflect a mortar back at the pirates, which will then trigger their own Deploy Giant Net skill, meaning you now know that you can safely launch your own high damage mortar back at them, and their skill will be on cooldown. So maybe useful for two specific sub-archetype builds, put in Deploy Giant Net at a C tier. Cleansing Blast. An AoE effect that removes negative buffs from you and your allies, whilst also removing positive buffs from any pirates in the range. This is not a universally useful skill. The ideal strategy is to avoid getting hit and debuffed in the first place, so this skill works best with a brawler or full defense spec ship that's going to be in the thick of it. However, debuffs in Windward are very powerful. At the highest difficulty content, I don't often find myself dying to direct or overwhelming damage. Most of the time, I can attribute deaths to a specific debuff or combination of debuffs that absolutely wreck my mobility, reduce my max hull, or put anti-bloodthirst on me, just for some examples. So that puts Cleansing Blast at a respectable B tier. Walk It Off. This is the solo version of Cleansing Blast, with a shorter cooldown to compensate for the lack of AoE, and Keely can be used through the Concussion negative status effect, which usually locks you out from using any skill for several seconds. Concussion status effects contribute to a high proportion of my deaths, so Walk It Off is a very useful skill, putting it at B tier. Lucky Coin. A very simple skill that grants a huge boost to critical chance and critical multiplier for both cannon and mortar users. The easiest A tier designation I've ever made. Works best on ships that have low default crit chance. If you boost your crit chance too high and then trigger Lucky Coin on top of that, you will suffer from diminishing returns. Just something to keep in mind. Bring out the stash. Another simple damage boosting skill. This time, huge critical chance, critical multiplier, and penetration specifically for cannon users. Another easy A tier, just an uncomplicated damage boosting skill. Proximity Mine. When out of combat, drop a mine that will trigger when a pirate ship sails close by. Good for trapping choke points or dropping onto towns for some free kills. Can be tricked to be used in combat by combining with the hide skill to give yourself a fog cloud, but dedicating 2 captain skills for this specific setup probably isn't advisable. The damage from Proximity Mine only scales with your diplomacy stat, so that does limit its usefulness as well. But despite the lukewarm reception I'm giving this skill, there is one trick that currently works in game that may or may not be patched out in the future. And that trick is, you can have a second captain in your inventory just to temporarily equip to trigger this skill and then immediately swap back to your regular captain, essentially giving you a fourth captain skill for no trade-off. The devs have indicated they may patch this out in the future, but for now it works, and that puts Proximity Mine at a solid B tier. Drop Observer. Stuff one of your crew members into a floating crate and they can telepathically report back to you what they see in the area. Basically, just a small fog of war removal skill to be used on choke points or towns. Can be used on a second captain, similar to Prox Mine, as to not actually take up a skill on your primary. The only use case I've seen for this skill that actually helps with combat and not just reconnaissance is running a fully out of combat Grogolov diplomacy ship. Find a nice choke point or town, drop an observer just behind said choke point or town. When you see pirates coming, throw a Grogolov on the town or choke point, while you sail happily away, never even in the pirates' line of sight. It's effective, but very niche, so we are slotting this in at C tier. Dreadnought. Sacrifice armor for more ram damage. Ramming deals its damage straight to hull, so while you are making yourself weaker to cannon and mortar fire, with Dreadnought roughly doubling the damage of your rams, you will overpower any pirates who are not using defensive skills to counter you. This skill should only be used with a ram in spec defense ship, which makes it a C tier for the purpose of this tier list, but please do keep in mind that that doesn't mean it's a bad skill. If we were making a tier list specifically for ramming builds, Dreadnought would be S+ tier. Summon Help. Call a ship from your shipyard to fight beside you. Once you've played the game long enough to have multiple ships fully spec'd and equipped, this skill is insanely powerful. You are basically summoning a second version of yourself to fight with you. Are you currently running a glass cannon ship? Well, build a tanking ship with Taunt that will take the pirate aggro away from you. Are you currently running a brawler offense build that jumps into a swarm of pirates? Well, summon a healing spec ship to follow you around tossing healing water barrels. Are you running a direct damage build that struggles taking down tanky pirates? Summon a Grogolov diplomacy ship that sinks the pirates via debuff stacking. Summon Help is an amazing way to complement your current ship or cover any deficiencies in your current build. It also shares the same secondary captain tech as Proximity Mine and Drop Observer, meaning you don't even need to make any trade-offs to run this skill. Equip a captain for 1 second to trigger Summon Help, then swap back to your normal captain. Unsurprisingly, from all my glazing, Summon Help is an S tier skill. Taunt. Increase your threat level, taking all the pirates' attention away from your allies and putting it onto yourself. Not 100% uptime unless you really stack haste or cooldown reduction skills, but still very powerful on a defensive spec ship. C tier due to its usage limited to a single sub-archetype. Half Sail is our last F tier skill. While the concept of sacrificing mobility to reduce the duration of all your cooldowns isn't a bad trade-off, the actual reduction is not enough to justify a whole captain's skill. You may as well run almost any other skill and get more bang for your buck. And our last skill on the list, Hotfix. Suffer some cooldown increase for a boost in your self-repair. I'll be honest here mates, I've never tested this skill. One of the other testers told me it was trash, and I trust their assessment. To offer some additional personal commentary, there are so many sources of healing in Windward already. Support ships heal through Water Barrel. Offense ships heal through at least 2 sources of Bloodthirst. Defense ships heal with Hasty Repairs talent, with none of those requiring one of your limited captain skills. Well, I don't want to put this in F tier when I can't personally vouch for that rating. We'll just go ahead and stretch it over C and F tier. If it is viable, it will only be for a specific niche full defense build. Let me know in the comments if you test this skill for yourself and have your own ranking for it. And that's all 17 captain skills currently in Windward Horizon. Make sure to like and subscribe, and see you on the seas in Windward, sinking some pirates. Demo available right now for Steam Next Fest.